if you recall, Paul, Silas, Timothy, and Luke have come upon the shores of Europe via what we would now call Greece, or that area of Macedonia. This is historic land going back to a time even before the Romans were the power of that region and of that whole world. Paul has been thrust out of as he's gone into the cities of Macedonia. He's been entered into Philippi and then kicked out, and then Thessalonica and then kicked out, and then Berea and kicked out. And now he's taking a sightseeing trip in Athens as he waits for Silas and Timothy. And as you do when you're in Athens, you walk around and you see the Parthenon and you see all these structures that have stood the test of time that you can even see now. It's even now a significant city. But at the time that Paul had entered into Athens, the golden age of Athens was, even at that point, several hundred, almost 500 years before Paul was roaming the agoras there. Athens had been home, of course, to some of the most famous and well-known philosophers like Socrates and Plato and Aristotle, all those guys that you're supposed to learn about, but you remember like 2 or 3 things about, but you know their names are very important. Well, their names ring through history, even now, of course, 2,500 years later. And it was no less significant at that time, these philosophers and those who brought wisdom to the Greek and Roman empires. Now, Athens, while it was waning in its importance in the Roman Empire, was still a well-known and well-regarded city as a cultural hub. It's a classic place to exchange ideas, get an education, learn new things, whether it be poetry or politics or religion or philosophy, or as verse 21 of Acts 17 says, that all the Athenians and the foreigners who lived there would spend their time in nothing except telling or hearing something new. And so it is that Paul, and I'm a little tongue-in-cheek there, I don't know if he felt that he was on vacation or not, because if this was a vacation, he must be the kind of guy that just cannot let work lie, that he's got to bring it with him. He immediately just starts evangelizing. So we'll read the text here, and then with that little bit of background, Athens, maybe fill out some of the details. Acts 17, verse 16. Now, while Paul was waiting for them at Athens, his spirit was provoked within him as he saw that the city was full of idols. So he reasoned in the synagogue with the Jews and the devout persons, and in the marketplace every day with those who happened to be there. Some of the Epicurean and Stoic philosophers also conversed with him, and some said, "What does this babbler wish to say?" Others said, "He seems to be a preacher of foreign divinities, because he was preaching Jesus and the resurrection." And they took him and brought him to the Areopagus, saying, "May we know what this new teaching is that you are presenting? For you bring some strange things to our ears. We wish to know, therefore, what these things mean." Now all the Athenians and the foreigners who lived there would spend their time in nothing except telling or hearing something new. Now we're going to talk mainly about the philosophy and the worldview of the day in Athens today. And next week we'll get into Paul's response, his preaching of the gospel. Not to say that today we're just going to talk about nothing except foreign ideas different to biblical Christianity, but we'll point out what it is that these Athenians were idolaters and who the Epicureans and Stoics are, mainly because these are still people you see today. Now, they don't wear the label idolater or the label Epicurean or Stoic, although, of course, there are still Epicureans today. But a lot of their worldview has trickled in to our culture and society today. And in fact, I would hasten to say I'm going to describe Epicureans and Stoics, and you're going to say, I know people like that. Or maybe even you yourself think these ways. And so by way of contrast, we'll consider how Christianity differs from that more next week, but we'll get into it this week. But we will spend a little bit of time on what it means that, what does idolatry mean or refer to, and who were these Epicureans and Stoics. Now, we've mentioned before that the Greeks as well as the Romans were polytheists. Poly means many, theos means God, so they believed in many gods. Athens itself was named after a goddess, Athena. At least one ancient writer claimed that there were 30,000 gods in Athens and quipped that it was easier to find a god in Athens than a man. So that's the kind of city that Athens was, and they were proud of that. Now, I'm going to share with you one of my favorite idolatry passages in the Bible, which sounds funny when you say it like that, but this is one of my favorite passages on idolatry in the Bible, and I think it helps us to understand the Bible's view on how silly is maybe not a kind word. Well, maybe it is derogatory, but it's foolish. So Isaiah chapter 44. Isaiah 44 points out the folly of idolatry. Starting in verse 14. Isaiah 44, 14. Actually, we'll go ahead and start in verse 9. All who fashion idols are nothing, and the things they delight in do not profit. Their witnesses neither see nor know, that they may be put to shame. Who fashions a god or casts an idol that is profitable for nothing? Behold, all his companions shall be put to shame, and the craftsmen are only human. Let them all assemble. Let them stand forth. They shall be terrified. They shall be put to shame together. The ironsmith takes a cutting tool and works it over the coals. He fashions it with hammers and works it with his strong arm. He becomes hungry and his strength fails. He drinks no water and is faint. The carpenter, that's just talking about the frailty of the craftsman. The carpenter stretches a line. He marks it out with a pencil. He shapes it with planes and marks it with a compass. He shapes it into the figure of a man, with the beauty of man to dwell in a house. So he takes all this work and he makes something that ultimately just is a representation of himself, and he sticks it in his house. It's kind of like the irony, like, you live in the house. Do you really need a sculpture of a man to live in your house to say how wonderful this house is? You would only do that as a testament to your own design and creativity. He cuts down cedars, or he chooses a cypress tree or an oak and lets it grow strong among the trees of the forest. He plants a cedar and the rain nourishes it. Then it becomes fuel for a man. He takes a part of it and warms himself. He kindles a fire and breaks bread. Also, he makes a god and worships it. He makes it an idol and falls down before it. Half of it he burns in the fire. Over the half he eats meat. He roasts it and is satisfied. Also, he warms himself and says, "Aha, I am warm. I've seen the fire." And the rest of it he makes into a god, his idol, and falls down to it and worships it. He prays to it and says, "Deliver me, for you are my God." So there's the folly of man taking from the same trunk of a tree. Half of it he's manipulating. He's using it for his own ends. He's clearly the master over it. He's using it to sustain himself, warming himself, baking bread. It's all of him. It's all of that craftsman, right, doing that and using the wood and manipulating it. And the other half of it, he carves an idol from it and he worships it as if it was over him. You see, half of it, it's under him. He's using it. It serves the man. The other half, though, he puts it over himself and he serves the wood. It's folly. They know not, nor do they discern, for he has shut their eyes so that they cannot see, and their hearts so they cannot understand. No one considers, nor is there knowledge or discernment to say, half of it I burned in the fire. I also baked bread on its coals. I roasted meat and have eaten. And shall I make the rest of it an abomination? Shall I fall down before a block of wood? He feeds on ashes. A deluded heart has led him astray, and he cannot deliver himself or say, "Is there not a lie in my right hand?" In other words, the idolater is deceived from their own idolatry to see the folly of the fact that they, with one half, made a fire, burned it, used it up for his own sake, and the other half he worships it. It's a lie that's in his hand that he cannot see. It's so blunt and so obvious. Idols are man's attempts to make things that aren't God, God. Whether that's actual created things that God has created, like animals or the sun. So we're trying to make something God created into God, right? Animals, people worship animals, nature, the sun, or so on. Or to make something that man has made, things out of wood and silver and gold, make that out to be God. It can also, of course, be intangible things, ideas, and concepts can actually be God. To a certain degree, these philosophers, for all the talk of Greeks and Romans being polytheists, a lot of philosophers were functionally atheist. Their gods were sometimes concepts like virtue or logic. We'll talk about that in a second. So, of course, even non-material things can be an idol or a god. That was certainly true of the Epicureans and Stoics. Now, rightly so, the Bible points out the folly of worshiping a created thing, because the one who created it is obviously greater. So why would you worship the sun and not the one who made the sun? Why would you worship the animals and the beasts when someone made those animals and beasts? Why should you worship logic or virtue when logic and virtue comes from God, that there is a God who embodies those things? So this is obviously worse in the case of a man creating something out of wood and worshiping it, because the man should inherently know, like in this example in Isaiah 44, hold on a second, half of this block of wood I chopped it up and I turned it into firewood and I made bread out of it. And the other half of it, I chopped it and carved it, and now I'm worshiping it. That should be obvious how foolish that is. Who's the one that has all the control and the power? Well, it's the man who made it. And yet the foolishness of idolatry in all its forms is that, that they are all, in a sense, man-made. Right? All the religions of the world, all of these different gods that are made up, who made them up? People did. And yet man would bow down to something they've created. That's a parable for AI and a lot of things, okay? But that's at its heart idolatry. Having said that, I like the angle of one commentator, Ray Stedman. I don't know if there's any relation. No, okay. He points out that the fact that they had so many gods and so many different kinds of gods, in a way, demonstrates that they're made in the image of God. We won't get there today, but in verse 22, when Paul is on the Areopagus, another word for that is Mars Hill, he's going to say, I see that you are very religious, very spiritual kinds of people. And he's saying that as an observation of all the 30,000 idols that he saw. This is how Ray Stedman puts it. Each idol revealed that these men and women of Athens had a great capacity for God. They knew there was something beyond man, and they were seeking for it, but each idol also revealed a twisting, a distorting of that capacity, a sabotaging of it. To add to his comments, because man is made in the image of God, he lives in constant awareness and acknowledgement of the attributes of God. Romans 1 puts it that God has made his divine attributes clear in the creation so that no one has an excuse. So, of course, throughout society and cultures, you have the human observation of things like justice or honor or morality or beauty or love. And yet so often the same civilizations and people would so often assign those attributes to physical and literal things, right? Justice, honor, love, mercy, kindness. Like, those are things that you cannot see. So what does man do? Well, here's the God of mercy. Here's the God of love. Here's the God of this. Or this tree represents life, and so we'll worship this tree. So you have all of these different gods who ironically represent different facets and reflections of the attributes of God. But who made those gods? Who made those idols? Man, because man still wants to stand over them, control them, create the myths so that the pantheon of gods in the Roman and Greek context, they were like us. So you have a god of love, Aphrodite, but you control the narrative about that. And then these gods end up being petty and cruel, limited in their knowledge and understanding, because this God is only the God of that one attribute. So they're lacking in these other attributes. So these gods fight and war amongst each other. They're limited in their strength. And so you have this peculiar conflict or duality that man is constantly wanting to submit himself to gods that he has created. And if you created it, you're over it, right? So it's this weird kind of, you're darned both ways, because you're the one who made this God that you're now trying to submit to. So it's just you, and you are a sinner. Idolatry is then, you could define it lots of ways, and I've kind of defined it lots of different ways here, because there's not necessarily just one clear definition of it, but you could also say that idolatry is man's attempt to make God more like us, and or to take man's pleasures, desires, these qualities that are reflected, or that we see because we're made in the image of God, and deify them and exalt them and worship them in a way that's convenient or easy or palatable for us. So idolatry, we're either trying to make God more like us, or to take the things that I know, I understand, I see, and make those God, deify them, elevate them. It all ends up kind of washing out to be the same corrupt dynamic. I am creating the things that I want to worship. So ultimately, who am I worshiping? Myself. And I'd argue that all idolatry, in a way, is just a way to worship myself, or for man to worship man. And you can make idols, again, not just of objects and things. You can make an idol of money or power, success, science, popularity, anything that you would say is more important than God. Or anything you say, well, God values this over anything else. So when you pursue money at the expense of everything else, you're either saying money is a god, or that God values money. Either way, it's the same kind of outcome, and you've distorted who God is. So this is what Paul saw in 30,000 different ways in Athens. It provoked him that there were so many idols in Athens. It says his spirit was provoked within him. This is not necessarily the Holy Spirit, but this is, all of us have a spirit inside him. His inner being, that which was cleansed and transformed by God, it's now being subjected to all of these so-called gods, and it just caused this reaction within him. The word provoked kind of means like needled, sharp kind of needles. In fact, we saw it already in Acts 15:39. The noun form of this verb we've seen in Acts 15:39, and it's when Paul and Barnabas came to a sharp disagreement. So this is the verb form of that noun, sharp disagreement. So this is a provocation. We also see this in 1 Corinthians 13:5, Paul using it there in the context of love, and says love is not irritable or resentful. So the word irritable, it's not provoked. Love is not provoking, and it's not provocable, you might say. I think both ways would be the idea. So frequently in the Old Testament, it's also used in Hebrews 10:14, where it says to provoke one another to love and good deeds. Same word, just like a sharp needling. All right. Now, in the Old Testament, when God is provoked, he is provoked to anger. So almost always you see that the Hebrew word for provoke associated with anger. And whenever God is provoked to anger, he does something. There is an expression of his wrath. It's not just an emotion. There's a provocation of his anger, and then he will act in judgment, almost always. Now, I want to point out here in Acts 17, though, that the text does not say that Paul is angry. When the Lord is provoked, there's judgment and wrath. But Paul's response here is peculiar if you think that his response here is angry, what does he do? So he reasoned in the synagogue with the Jews and the devout persons and in the marketplace every day with those who happen to be there. He responds by doing what he normally does. Going into the synagogues, reasoning from the scriptures, explaining and proving that it was necessary for the Christ to suffer and to rise from the dead. That's Acts 17:2. That was his MO. He'd go into a city, if there's synagogue, he goes there, he brings up the Hebrew scriptures, he shows that they point to a Messiah, and then Jesus is that Messiah. He died and rose again on the third day for the forgiveness of your sins. Do you have any questions? We also see that, of course, in verse 18, the reference that he was preaching Jesus and the resurrection. So, if this is an example of, so some paint the picture of Paul being angry, like he's just fuming as he's stomping through Athens. He sees all these idols and he can't help but stop and just start rebuking everyone. Well, it doesn't say that. He did what he normally did. So I don't see that this is an example of Paul having some kind of righteous anger, although if this is an example of what anger should look like, I guess I have no problem with that. He's like, I'm so mad right now, I'm going to be super reasonable and rational, and I'm going to preach Jesus. Don't get me angry. It's like, no, get angry all the time then, I guess, if that's what anger is. When you're really angry, you get really reasonable and you start preaching Jesus to everyone. Yeah, sure, get angry. So I don't think he was getting angry in any case, but he was provoked and he stirred up. He had to do something about it. But what he did was not just act out or act brashly, not even make a whip of, a whip and then start driving people out of the marketplace. Even then, I don't think Jesus was angry. He said, zeal for my Father's house has consumed me. So I don't even know if that was an angry act. But Paul doesn't do any of those things. He's very reasonable. The sentiment here is probably more intended to tell us what kind of things bother Paul. What are the things that really irk or bother him? And it seems like the things that bother him is anything that would impede on the gospel, anything that would be a reproach or blasphemy to the gospel and to who Christ is. And I think it's worth it to say what really bothers you. What things get you stirred up? What provokes you? Is it lost sinners following their false idols and pursuits into destruction? That should provoke us. Is it God being insulted by not being the foremost object of man's worship? Well, that should stir us up in our spirit a little bit. But so often, the things that we're provoked by are usually, day by day anyway, the small and petty things. And I think it's just worth it to think about, like, what bothers me? What bothered me yesterday that I was just so provoked in my spirit about? And just think, was it really about the glory of God, or about the glory of man, or the glory of myself? Now, again, we do see Paul's typical pattern of preaching in the synagogues, and we add to that some street evangelism. And at the time, Athens, it was very typical for that. So it's not like he was doing something kind of intentionally provocative. Oh, they've upset me so much, I'm going to do something a little crazy here. I'm going to go out into the intersection and I'm going to start preaching Jesus. No, Athens was the one place where everyone was doing that. So to a certain degree, this was not an unusual habit. There was always someone trying to get a crowd to listen. Now, they tended to gather at Mars Hill, which is where Paul is asked to go. But, we lose that here in the suburban areas. The only time you see people on the corners when they're protesting something. But if you go to like New York or other cities, you'll find performers on the corners and the subways. It's not a big deal. So him going out to the agora, the marketplace, was not like some super unusual thing to preach there. Now, as he stood there, he engaged with two kinds of people in particular, and they get into a back and forth. Epicurean philosophers and Stoic philosophers. Now, Epicurus, who is the founder of Epicureanism, and Zeno of Citium, who was considered the founder of Stoicism. They used to call it Zenoism, but Zeno thought it was tacky to name it after himself. So they went with Stoicism. It was named after the Stoas, or the pillars, by which they taught. So much more neutral name, but that's the origin. They developed their schools of thought in Athens almost 300 years prior to this. So 300 years before Paul stepped into Athens, these two philosophers had begun to philosophize and to consider a worldview. Now, they were not necessarily opposite to each other, but they were sometimes compared and contrasted, often compared and contrasted to each other. And even just before the birth of Jesus, there's a Roman philosopher, orator, Cicero, who would often compare and contrast these two philosophies. And so even hundreds of years later, Stoicism and Epicureanism still had strong followings, and they were like two of about 5 or 6 like major strains of philosophy that were running through Athens. And to a certain degree, they still do exist today, although kind of evolved. And again, I think you will hear echoes of some of these philosophies and worldviews in people you know probably. Now, we're not going to do a full-blown philosophy study today, just a quick overview to give the general ideas, and then, of course, how Christianity compares to them. But to consider the Epicureans first, they were what's called deistic, D-E-I-S-T-I-C, deistic. And that is basically atheism with a god, or gods. Meaning, okay, if there are gods out there, they don't have anything to do with what's happening here. So sometimes if you've heard that phrase, the watchmaker god, who created the universe, just winded it up, started it going, he just backs off and either has nothing to do with that world and just walks away from it, doesn't care, or he is just watching it unfold and he's not going to intervene or touch it. So functionally, it's atheism, right? It's just, okay, maybe there's some higher powers or something, but it doesn't matter from the day to day. They don't interfere with the lives of humans, so you don't have to worry about them. Now you think about that. This is at a time when they believed in this polytheistic world, right? All the Zeus and Athena and Aphrodite and all these things, and it just tells you that was sort of stories and tales, even sometimes politics, but you didn't necessarily believe that stuff back then. Epicureans were hedonistic, meaning that they believed you should live for pleasure and avoid pain. And that really, there are no real virtues or values that are objective. There's only pleasure. And so pleasure, if you want to talk about good and evil, pleasure is the only good, and conversely, pain is the only evil. Now, they did realize that pursuing pleasure too much could result in pain or regret. Oftentimes they did. So some pleasures just were not worth it for the potential pain it could create. So by hedonistic, it doesn't mean that they were constantly just trying to have the most wild and crazy adrenaline rush high all the time, but they live for what you might call a sustainable pleasure. They called it ataraxia, which is a freedom from fear, freedom from worries and concerns. So ataraxia is kind of like troubles, and a means not or lack of. So just I'm looking for a pleasure that is just a freedom from having to worry or be concerned about things. So ironically, they did end up living what looked like kind of a simple, virtuous, self-controlled life, but it wasn't because they were seeking virtue for virtue's sake. They just avoided things that might cause trouble. So when you think about it, if you spend a lot of money on alcohol and partying drugs, a few weeks or months or years later, you're going to be in a worse position to experience pleasure because you're going to be destitute, or you're going to be physically, your body will be destroyed. You're going to owe a lot of money. People will forsake you. He said, see, if you do that kind of stuff, you're actually not going to have a very pleasurable life. So let's look for eco-friendly, sustainable pleasure here. They also avoided politics because it disturbed the pleasure of a person and introduced frustration. Like, It's not worth it. So apolitical, somewhat atheistic, what looks like on the outside a virtuous life, but really they're just trying to maximize sustainable pleasure and just avoid, things that were uncomfortable or cause pain, even like for the future. So it sort of kind of sounds reasonable, right? The pursuit of knowledge, then, in their philosophy, like, why do you pursue knowledge? Well, it was only so that you could get rid of religious fears and superstitions that cause you to worry, right? That impede upon your pleasure. So the pursuit of knowledge is trying to reason why you don't need to have fear or worry about certain things, particularly, again, in their culture, the gods. So the two primary fears that they sought to eliminate through knowledge was the fear of the gods and the fear of death. Philodemus, who he came up with these 4 kind of pithy statements. This is ancient world as well. He's a follower of or an observer of these philosophies. He kind of summed it up with these 4 principles. Don't fear God. Don't worry about death. What is good is easy to get, and what is terrible is easy to endure. It's a very simple, 4-fold worldview. Don't fear God. Don't worry about death. What's good is simple. You don't seek the crazy pleasures. Sustainable pleasures. And what is terrible, if don't overthink it. If it's really bad, you're going to die, and it doesn't matter. Otherwise, you're going to get through it. That kind of mentality. Now, when you think about that, you probably know people who maybe functionally that's how they live. Seek maximum sustainable pleasure and minimize pain and discomfort. Now, it'll look like, being kind of self-controlled, right? Don't go too crazy on things. Kind of live moderately and just be happy. It might even look noble. Epicureanism, it's still around today, and you probably know people like that. Maybe you've even thought this way yourself. Does it sound kind of familiar? Well, it's been around for a while. Now, on the other hand, we have Stoicism. Now, Stoicism was a lot more rigorous. It was more systematic. It was more like a school and not just, say, a philosophy, and let's just try to figure out how we can worry less about things. Don't worry, be happy, I guess. Now, there's a lot more to Stoicism. But in Stoicism, I would say there's a lot more like self-talk. There's a lot more dialoguing, that is defending and supporting propositions of truth, like truth claims, to yourself and to others. We need to talk this out reasonably and logically and tell ourselves why something is or isn't so. And they relied more on arguments. And I don't mean arguing, but arguments, meaning premise, conclusion. That kind of argument, like a mathematical argument. A classic Stoic syllogism, and that is like a set of arguments, is like this. If it is day, it is light. It is day, therefore it is light. That's like a syllogism. It's an argument. You have premises, and you can get a therefore out of it. Now, if you're not into that sort of thing, not a big deal. But they saw that the world, the universe, had a certain reasoning or logic to it. And so the pursuit of knowledge is seeing and understanding, you could say, the logic of the universe. And to be able to reason it out, to, in a sense, reduce it to propositions or logical statements that you and I could argue about and agree upon. And so in a way, if the universe is kind of following a set logic or path, what makes most sense, right, is for you to be okay with whatever the universe is doing. So typically when you think of a Stoic person, there's someone that doesn't necessarily respond to what's going on around them, right? They're just kind of always stone-faced. It doesn't matter what's happening and what trials. They're able just to, just take it and go on. Well, the logic behind that, at least is the philosophy, is what's the point of going against what the universe is doing? Isn't it the most sensible thing, if the universe is doing that, for you just to quickly get your thinking on the same track. Like, why fight that? So, if an earthquake kills half my family, well, I can't change that. There's nothing I could have done about that, and I might as well accept it and line myself up with the universe. Get on the same page as the universe here. And when bad things happen then, and my emotions, like anger or sadness, well up, that is coming because I'm not accepting the world the way it is, right? I am at odds with how reality is working. So those emotions, in a sense, are wrong or bad. So that's where you get that sentiment that Stoic people don't have emotions, right? Or kind of emotionless. It's because it's this idea, well, I'm only having that emotion because I'm not on the same page as the universe. If I was on the same page, I would just accept it. I wouldn't be mad about it. I would just, my emotions are not going to change anything about it. So when we accept everything that happens, in a sense, I will be happy, right? So if I accept what happens, I'll be happy. I'll be in sync with the universe and all my circumstances, and if I can do that without losing self-control, which makes me act emotionally, then I am in tune. And these are things that I can logic myself into, right? I can tell myself this is the way it is. So if that sounds like a Stoic person, like, listen, it's got to be logical and reasonable about this. We can't let emotions get in the way. That's what's sort of at the heart of it. And it would then be virtuous. The virtues are being clear and unbiased thinkers. The virtues are not letting emotions or things that are not rational run your life. The virtues are objective, right? Unlike the Epicureans, where whatever makes me happy is my virtue. You could say that virtue is some objective external thing in the sense that the universe, doing what it's doing, I need to just line up with that. That is an objective virtue to line up with that. So pleasure, Epicureans, pleasure, virtue is incidental to the seeking of pleasure, whereas Stoics would say that happiness is found in keeping virtues that line you up with reality better. So if you want to be happy, then you got to pursue these virtues, and the virtues are that which lines you up with how the universe runs. Now, oversimplifying things a bit here. And of course, every one of these has different branches of thoughts and blah, blah, blah. And that's why they would argue about. That's why they'd go and listen. But these are kind of general swath of what's happening here. And again, I think you'd probably know folks that you would consider Stoic, right? That do seem to just say, well, kind of a fatalistic mentality. There's no point getting mad about it, right? Just keep pressing forward, right? Just don't let it bother you, right? You got to keep putting one foot in front of the other. You probably know people about that. No sense, there's no sense getting upset about it, or someone who just try to logic you into feeling better. It's all kind of a Stoic thing. Does that sound familiar to any of you? Like, are you like, oh, actually, you just described me? Hold on. You've been talking about me. Well, these thoughts, these worldviews, these philosophies come from somewhere, okay? And it's not like just the Western world. Of course, the Eastern world, their philosophies, they have similar ideas there. Why is that? Why is it that these philosophies and worlds can have some overlapping ideas about how to address the world? Well, it's like what we said about idolatry. We're all made in the image of God. Within every culture, worldview, philosophy, however you want to put that, of course there's going to be echoes and reflections of truth because we are made in the image of God. We are going to see in Asian cultures or Latin American cultures, in some way, shape, or form, some of the values that reflect the biblical God, but it's all distorted, right? As Ray Stebbins said, there's something twisted in all of them. And so even within Epicureanism and Stoicism, there's some things I think rightly you'd say, well, no, that sounds like not a bad thing. John Piper's whole thing is Christian hedonism. His whole point is you need to seek your pleasure. But he would say the greatest pleasure is what? God, right? God is the greatest good. He's the source of every good thing. So if you were to seek your pleasure, what are you really seeking? God. So, I mean, I think you can see some overlap with that. In Stoicism, you can see some overlap. Well, it's true that God has a plan. And when we are submitted to his plan, not our own plan, are things generally going to be better? Well, yeah. I mean, Stoicism kind of made it a slightly godless thing. It's like just the universe, kind of an abstraction. The universe has like a logos, a logic too, but it's not to say that it's like a person. So, I mean, you see, right? You see these echoes of what God, or who God is, even in these things. So there's something to commend in these worldviews and really the worldviews, religions, cultures of the world, that you could probably say, but that is something that shows that you're made in the image of God, just as we said at the beginning. Well, we see the problem in their words here, and there's two major ones. I'll get through them fast. They call them, what does this babbler wish to say? Right, in verse 18. And some said, what does this babbler wish to say? Others rightly acknowledge that he's preaching about a God in particular, Jesus. So clearly, in contrast to these almost atheistic ideas, Paul was preaching a personal Jesus. And then we get the comment at the end there that they'd spend their time in nothing except telling or hearing something new. So I think here we have the seeds of the fault or folly of the way they're approaching it. As much as there might be some overlap, ultimately their worldview fails and falls in comparison to biblical Christianity. And the first comment is that ultimately, or not ultimately, but these men are the kind of people that are impressed by people. So when they say, what does this babbler wish to say, that's kind of an ad hominem attack, right? And a babbler, it's someone who lives on the seeds and scraps in the marketplace. So that's an ad hominem. That's an attack on Paul's character. Like you're nobody. You're just feeding on the bottom of the marketplace here. Like, who is this guy? So they are the kind of people that are impressed by people or like to judge people. In other words, they are really about man-made philosophies. They're really about that which man has created. So it's still idolatry. Even though their worldview doesn't really have gods, you see that they do kind of believe in God. They are impressed by what people have to say and things that sound really, really good and sound like they are make me feel good for understanding it. But as we talked about actually yesterday at the men's breakfast, in 1 Corinthians 1:18 through 25, I won't read the whole thing, but I encourage you to read it. 1 Corinthians 1:18, for the word of the cross is folly to those who are perishing, but to us who are being saved, it's the power of God. For it is written, I will destroy the wisdom of the wise, and the discernment of the discerning I will thwart. Where's the wise? Where's the scribe? Where's the debater of this age? Has not God made foolish the wisdom of the world? So there's a sense in which anything that is man-made is going to have a fault within it. Anything that is man-made is going to make man the point. And inherently there's going to be a seed of sin and foolishness in it. And such to the point such that God will say, my foolishness can confound the wisdom of the wise. So they're impressed by people, more impressed by people than by the things of God. So they sit there and they judge Paul as a person. So that's one of the fatal flaws of any worldview, religion, culture, philosophy, is that they're made by man. All of them. Very man-oriented, man-centered, man-created. The Bible does not claim to be a work of man. Now you might say some works don't claim to be a work of man either. Actually, not many. There's not many that don't have a very identifiable person that this is about or who made it. You just go through the major religions. So very man-centered. That's the first flaw in what these philosophers are coming. The second one is that they want to judge truth rather than submit to truth. And we see that in their statement about, we want to hear new teachings and strange things. You're saying some strange things. Tell me more about these strange things. Why? Because they want to judge it. They want to stand over it. They want to be persuaded by it. But you can't submit to truth and stand over the truth at the same time. Again, that's the folly of idolatry, is you're trying to submit to the thing that you just created and you're over it. It's kind of a similar idea. How can you submit to the truth while standing over it in judgment? That's what Mars Hill is about. Is these men and women would stand there and judge truth. But what's the reality of Scripture? Truth judges us. We don't judge the truth. Truth judges us. Over and over and over again, we see this. Romans 1:18 through 25. So it's kind of like 1 Corinthians 1:18 through 25 if you need something to read. But Romans 1:18 through 25, it's very clear. His divine attributes, namely his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly perceived ever since the creation of the world and the things that have been made, so they are without excuse. Claiming to be wise, they became fools and exchanged the glory of the immortal God for images resembling mortal man and birds and animals and creeping things. In other words, the truth has been revealed to them, but they want to stand over the truth, not submit to it. James 4:11 and 12. James 4:11 and 12. The one who speaks against a brother or judges his brother speaks evil against the law and judges the law. But if you judge the law, you are not a doer of the law, but a judge. There's only one lawgiver and judge, he who is able to save and to destroy. But who are you to judge your neighbor? So the premise of the argument there is the reason you should not judge your neighbor is because then you'd be judging the law. And you don't judge the law judges you. And the law there means the Scriptures. 2 Timothy 4:3 through 4. Paul says, for the time is coming when people will not endure sound teaching, but have itching ears. They will accumulate for themselves teachers to suit their own passions, and will turn away from listening to the truth and wander off into myths. In other words, people want to judge truth and hear what they want to hear. They'll gather for themselves those who will speak the things they want, which means they are standing over the truth, not under the truth. 2 Thessalonians 2:10 and 12. Last passage here. 2 Thessalonians 10:11 and 12. And here, we'll begin in verse 9. The coming of the lawless one is by the activity of Satan, with all power and false signs and wonders, and with all wicked deception for those who are perishing, because they refuse to love the truth and so be saved. Therefore, God sends them a strong delusion, so that they may believe what is false, in order that all may be condemned who did not believe the truth, but had pleasure in unrighteousness. And here's the warning about the end times, is that there will be a demonic deception for people to not listen to the truth. Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, no, I gave the right verse. But would rather stand in judgment over it. Over and over again. The Bible is a tale exactly of that. Man trying to make man the center of things. And man trying to stand over the truth rather than submit under the truth. And Paul is going to point this out. But this is what I would claim to my Stoic friends and my Epicurean friends. The pursuit of philosophy just for philosophy's sake, to be impressed by the argument of some articulate orator, is not the purpose of living, to be persuaded moment by moment by whoever has the best argument. That just makes us a judger of people. But secondly, it's to understand that if there is truth, there is just truth, and I don't stand in judgment over it. I must submit to it. Well, where is truth? How can I understand it? How can I find it? And it's only in the Bible where the Bible says that, first of all, there is objective truth. Secondly, that he has given us truth in Scripture. And thirdly, that we have truth in a person. John 14:6, Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. Only Scripture says that the person of God and the truth of God are united in one human and divine person, Jesus Christ. That is utterly unique. That is not like the gods and demigods of the Roman and Greek empires, where they had a God of truth and they had people that are like half gods and things like this. No, we're saying that truth is a purview of the only God, the only one God who is all the virtues and all the attributes of divinity. And that this God came down and embraced humanity without separating his divinity. And in a display of all of the divine attributes, as Hebrews 1 talks about and Colossians talks about, he came and he sacrificed himself, died for us to reconcile us to him. That we cannot achieve divinity by enough study or philosophy or rational arguments or the seeking of pleasure, but rather only in God himself reaching down to us first in love, sacrificing himself to make us his children. That must come first. That we must be reconciled relationally to God first in order to be right with him, in order to pursue these values and virtues. We must first know the God of all value, of all virtue. So we'll get into this stuff next time, just as a way of preview. But if you are out here, not a Christian, and you're flying by the seat of your pants, or perhaps you're an Epicurean or Stoic or some mixing of these things, God is telling you, you cannot stand over truth and submit to the truth. You cannot live your life just being persuaded by the next guy and the next guy and the next guy. There's only God, and God is the God of truth. To submit to him is to submit to truth. To submit to truth is to submit to him. You are in basically a long roundabout way, as all idolaters and philosophers are, of worshiping yourself. Well, when I look in the mirror and I think of what I want to worship, not the guy in the mirror. Last thing I would want to worship. No one should worship him. It's folly. It's foolishness. God calls you to repent. Put your faith and trust in him. If you are a Christian today, I think maybe the main thing to get from this is people out there need to hear about who Jesus is. It doesn't matter their background. Paul has seen it and heard it all. And he had the same singular message, Jesus Christ and him crucified. If you can preach that, you can evangelize, you can share to anyone. So feel equipped towards that end. Feel motivated by that.